All right, welcome back to a brand new video of the Targeted Individual Program, Targeted Individual Experience. So, when they keep doing what it is that they do in terms of playing the number game, right? It took me a while to um, figure out a lot of things that they were doing, right? Because remember, I've been a TI for well over 2 decades. In the beginning, they used to have they used to have me in this transit state, right, in which they can manipulate me. People will point and I'll be looking in that direction. People will, and so forth, right? That is how they know that they have you on their trance, meaning that they what they have done is that they have synced your left brain and your right brain, right? And now they're directly influencing your subconscious mind. Okay, so I talk about that these people are experts. They have experts, in the field of psychology. You talk about the police department, the FBI, the CIA. They have done a lot of psychological experiments to understand, not only to understand people's personality, but to create whatever type of personality they want to create. Right? And again, a lot of these pastors have learned the art of psychological manipulation. This is why you see they will manipulate elderly people into having them sign over their deed to the house, emptying out their bank account and so forth. And when we as black people, particularly Negropeans, are the most religious group of people in America, particularly our women, right? They are believers, right? They will tell you, I'm a believer, right? And what happens with believers is that you can manipulate them because they're ignorant. And in their ignorance, they have arrogance. And so the people who have knowledge, who use science, who use tricks, let me tell you something. The white man, as the Native American said, they speak with forked tongue, right? I showed you guys the letter from the United States in the 1800s to King Leopold of Belgium, talking about this a U.S. Emissary that was in Congo, talking about how Belgium, the white men, will manipulate the Africans, right, by putting a battery in his coat with a long wire to shake the African hand and shocking the African to where he jumps off of his feet, right? So they've always used manipulation on us, right? This is why they have to keep us, dumbed down, right? They have to keep us as believers because we're going to believe everything, right? And because of our propensity to be believers and religious, we think everything is in the supernatural realm, and this is something that they created. That is their wording. That is their creation. There is no such thing as supernatural. Understand me? It is idea planted in our minds by a people who couldn't understand what our ancestors' spiritual concept, I should say part of it, part of our ancestors' spiritual concept, right? It isn't until much later, talk about when they went back into Africa, when the French went back into Egypt, and then the British, and then discovering a lot of the texts, a lot of the creation, right? So you can see, images of what they consider to be flying devices and so forth, right? Also, with the expulsion of the Moors in southern Europe, the Catholic Church took all of the knowledge, right? So the universities of Salamanca in Spain, the libraries that houses information books, whereas the rest of Europe they just gave them religion. Europe was 99% illiterate during that time. I'm talking about the 16, 17, uh, from the time from the end of from the end of the Christian Islamic wars, in which the Arab Islamists expelled the Europeans out of North Africa, right? So we're talking about the 7th century, right? and the Catholic Church stranglehold on the rest of Europe. And basically, again, you got to learn the history and go learn the truth about how Europe was, particularly from the after uh, they got expelled, after the Moors conquered southern Europe, Spain, Italy, Portugal, and so forth, right? France, Britain, they lived a life of dirt and filth, right? Uneducated. They couldn't bathe because people used to get beaten because they bathed, because they would become too. The church would say that if you bathe, you become boastful, and you think that only God can be boastful. So the madness, the mental illness of that the church have created within the minds of the majority of Europeans during that time. Again, Hollywood have glorified their history, right? But it is they had a renaissance. When did they had the renaissance? They had the renaissance after the expulsion of the Moors in southern Europe. Because why? Because now they had the knowledge. Now they had the Catholic Church took the knowledge, and when you talk about the European England and stuff like that, but they were still living in filth, right? When you had Italy, you had Michelangelo. This was the time when, you know, just as the Moors were being defeated in southern Europe, right? But because southern Europe grew for over 700 years, they had a period of enlightenment, of education, right? You had most people in southern Europe could read. You had universities, schools, whereas in England, Spain, not England, England, France, Germany, and so forth, you had I should say Germany, but England and France, you had a period of almost 1,000 years of, you know, just ignorance and madness, right? So they've learned, right? They've learned, and they've used the knowledge that they took from the Moors, and only the wealthy was able to be educated. But like I said, 99% of Europe at the time, particularly not Europe, England and France, were illiterate. Okay, so I want you to understand how they keep us illiterate, how they keep us as believers, right? Because when you keep people as believers, you can manipulate them in any single way, right? So I talk about mentalists. I talk about Darren Brown. What's his name? The other dude, is it Chris Angle? These are mentalists, right? They're able to manipulate us. How? Because they get information about us. They get information about our families. They study us, right? Not only that, but they through having a simple conversation with us, they can embed whatever subliminal message, whatever thing that they want to do in our subconscious mind, and we would not recognize it. So if you watch these sort of shows, so-called magic shows, but now they're mentalists now, because they're beyond just the so-called magician tricks, right? The reason why they call mentalists, because they're able to manipulate our minds. Okay, understand that these people are trained. They have to train decades of training to become really, or I should say, at least a decade of training to become really good at manipulating people's mind. So this is what they do for us as TIs. Whereas they use technology, we're microchipped. They use silent sound to embed certain things, and even the people around us are being manipulated. So they already know the outcome, right? We're the ones who, because we don't want to understand these things, we only want to believe, they can manipulate us. So I'm doing this video, if you're a TI and you're watching this, is to help take the mysticism out of what it is that they're doing, to help you take the so-called supernatural aspect of what it is that they want you to believe is being done, right? So that way, when they'll do it, and they'll continue to do it, right? They'll continue to do it. So no matter whatever number they pick, that's the number it's going to be. They already know the outcome. There's nothing you can do about it. You know what I'm saying? So you just have to understand that it's tricks and manipulation that they're using, and don't feed into the whole supernatural thing, what have you. You know what I'm saying? So exposing what it is that they do, it takes the secrecy out of it. It takes the mysticism out of it. It gives you, it empowers you to understand that it's manipulation. And because you and I are not experts in those fields, whereas they're using experts in those fields using technology. So I talk about going to Chipotle with my daughter. I bought Chipotle for her and her brother, and it came to $32. Why did it come to $32? Right? When my daughter went to get what she wanted, the guy behind the counter said, "Bowl, you want a bowl?" And she was like, "Yes." When I got there, he's like, "You want a burrito?" Right? And it wasn't for me for eating, so I said, "Yes, okay," because they know that, right? Because they know that during the entire day, bombarded me with the number 32 to try to put me in that transit state. I already knew. I've been through so many times. So like I said, it doesn't affect me. Little simple shit like that, that shit don't affect me. Like I said, because they can't manipulate me into trying to harm myself or harm others, because that's what they really want. Okay, so because they can no longer do that, they can do in the very simple, easy shit. That's what they do, right? The other stuff is hard for them to do. You know what I'm saying? Which is to try to manipulate me to harm myself and others. So the fact that he said that, they already knew. You know what I'm saying? They already knew. And then as I exit out, that's why I started recording. As I exit out of the Chipotle, then you start to see people looking at me like, oh yeah, you're because it's number 32, so you're guilty. Yeah, you're this and that. I'm like, please, please, that shit don't work. When you have knowledge, when you understand, when you know, it takes the mysticism out of these things. It is what Robert J. Lipton called the mystical manipulation, right? In the what is it, the 10 criteria of thought reform. I believe it's 10 criteria. I know there's 7 criteria in the Curse of Persuasion programming. Not criteria, but tactics and methods. And then there's 10 criteria when it comes to thought reform. And then Robert J. Lipton, 10 criteria of thought reform, mystical manipulation is one of the things that cult leaders use. But not only cult leaders, whether they be in law enforcement, whether they be in religious institution, whether they be in corporations, they all use your belief system against you to benefit them. All right, understand that. Everything that they do is manipulation. I want you to understand that. Everything that they do is manipulation. Whether it be psychological manipulation, whether it's being using technology to manipulate us and to manipulate things, right? For example, downloaded images on somebody's phone, right, to accuse them of being a certain type of person, right? Taking, accessing your phone and stealing information from your phone, right, and then try to use that against you. So when you understand these things, and like I said, go and look at ID 2020, right, and listen to and read what they say about how law enforcement, the financial institution, those who have nefarious agendas can use this so-called ID to manipulate you in every single way and to silence you, right? So understand what it is that they're doing, okay? Because that shit don't work. Anyhow, public announcement. Like I said, this is to demystify the things that they do by understanding exactly what it's to do. So go look at these videos. They're also videos in which they show you how they do the mind reading trick to make you believe that they're reading your mind. All right. Talk to you guys in the next video.